Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out with us again. This is Taking Back Your Life 2017 Business Takeover. As you know, I have invited several of key people that I know and others that I've seen in the industry to come on and talk about specific entrepreneurial nuggets. So I absolutely know you're going to enjoy our guest today. She is at her worst a brilliant mind and at her best a phenomenal connector. In 2009, she founded a merchant service brokerage, and in 2011, she founded Network Under 40. Please join me in welcome Miss Darrah Brustein. Hi, Darrah. How are you?
Hey, doing great. How are you?
Always great to speak with great minds. Darrah, first of all, I always start off with this nugget. Before you were brilliant, as a business connector and innovator and entrepreneur, who was Darrah Brustein?
I don't think she's changed. I think, interestingly, she was always a connector. However, she didn't have a language for it. There wasn't the vocabulary for it. So she's always been someone who cared deeply about other people and was deeply curious in the world around her. And that's evolved into maybe not a brilliant person that's very generous, but the person that you're describing today.
You mentioned language, so let's start with that. How do you define, in the context of what you do, a connector?
I think it's someone who sees the world as a puzzle. It's someone who, like I said, has this curiosity whereby you're drilling into situations and interactions with people, so much so that you're picking up on cues to say, this is something that this person excels at, or perhaps has a need that someone else in your network could address, or that they have that gift that you could recommend to someone else that you know. And it's seeing those often idiosyncratic pieces from one person to another that you can connect and link together, like I said, as a puzzle.
And I talked in the beginning that your first company was a merchant service brokerage. Can you talk a little bit about what services is? And by the way, is that company still around? You still in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that started in 2009, like you mentioned, 8 years ago with my twin brother. And we still run it. It's in 38 states. And what it is credit card processing. So when a business accepts credit card payments from their customers, we set up that service. And our differentiator is that we are a brokerage. So we shop the marketplace on their behalf to help sort of disseminate what can be an extremely deceptive and confusing industry and make it more straightforward for someone.
I'm curious, what attributes, just from your perspective, does one need to have to become an entrepreneur or business owner in today's, it's different than 20 years ago, right? The mindset is different. Technology is different. What assets do you think a person needs to have before they take that journey?
The first thing that comes to my mind is persistence. I think so many people have fantastic ideas, but they aren't able to execute on them, and that takes persistence. You have to be able to trudge through what can often be unfun and unsexy, like day-to-day tasks and follow-up and systemizing things, or doing a lot of the dirty work that you can't afford to have someone do at many points in the stages of your company. And you have to be able to have the thick enough skin paired with that perseverance to say, I'm going to keep going when people tell me no, or people don't think this is the best idea. If you believe in it and you're seeing any market traction to give you feedback to say that this is something worth pursuing, and it's not just a far-fetched, far-flung, no one cares, and you're just almost in a way going after something with zero positive feedback loop, then at that point is when I think it's the thick-skinned meets the perseverance that are so important. And something that I always say that I am blown away by that becomes a differentiator in a market is simply doing what you say you'll do. That so many people make promises they don't keep, and that those who do, and they do it at the level or better than they've promised and in the time frame with which they've promised or more quickly, can instantly set themselves apart in a marketplace as an entrepreneur, because so few people do that basic thing.
It's funny. I agree with you 1,000%. I just did a video montage for someone. They hired me to come out, and they were so gracious and happy that I actually sent the information over to them in a timely fashion. I mean, it was weird to hear them say that, because it was like, oh, I was supposed to do that. That's what you paid me to do. But I guess, like you said, just do what you say you're going to do, and you're going to be probably at the top 10% of the market. I used to, when I was in real estate many moons ago, I used to say the real estate agent that answered their phone would instantly jump up into the high bracket of realtors, because all realtors typically just go to voicemail and they get around to you. So the first person that answers usually, is successful in that way. So I think that's along the same vein.
Yeah, when people follow up and follow through in any capacity of a relationship, whether it's when you meet someone or when you're trying to see clients or whatever the situation might be, those are so sadly uncommon that it really does set you apart.
So I want to talk a little bit about you business partners, because you just mentioned, and I read that you are partnered, at least with the first company, your service brokerage company, with your twin.
Yep.
So, and that's, God knows I could never partner with my brother, but that's a whole nother story. When you get people, and I know a lot of first time business owners and people who are looking to go in as an entrepreneur, the first fear is being by themselves. So they always look to, well, I don't have this, or I'm not great at that. How can I find someone else to go in business with? And if you don't do that process right, you're starting off in a really bad way, whether that's family or non-family. How would you recommend to those who are listening, picking a business partner, to put it in a simple way?
I've heard the analogy before that it's like a marriage and it should be treated like one. And I completely agree that if it's someone that you wouldn't be willing to go into a legal partnership and a day-to-day partnership, that you would treat it in the same way that you'd court and date someone to potentially marry, because you're ultimately saying something very similar. You're building something together. You're working towards a similar future. You know there's going to be challenges and disagreements and hard times, and you're willing to work with that person through that. You're willing to legally say that we're partnered in this financially for good or for bad. And you're willing to say that I'm wanting to spend the majority of my daily hours with you. And that's not insignificant. So like anything with the relationship, I think you have to have basic human chemistry and find that there's some synchronicity there. And then beyond that, like with my twin, I think our biggest advantage, short of the fact, which is a huge advantage, that we had a lifetime of knowing each other from womb to present day, and there's deep intrinsic trust built into that, that you have to have different skill sets. I think a lot of people are attracted to people who are just like them, but ultimately you're doing yourself a disservice if you have two people who are growth and business development minded, for example, and no one who's perhaps operationally oriented. And in my case, I'm the first and my twin is the latter. And if he were to have been like me, we'd have just been trying to do the same thing all the time. And there'd be this whole gaping arena that we'd be not paying any attention to, because neither of us prefer to do it. It's not our highest and best strength. And it wouldn't be super productive. So while you may have a lot of arenas in a relationship that connect or seem complementary, if your skill sets overlap too much, I actually think you're going to do yourself a disservice.
2 years later, I believe you started Network Under 40. What was going on in your business life at that time where you felt the need that service should be, created or brought into existence?
Yeah, I mean, that was an interesting accident, actually. I didn't do it to say, here's a new business. All that happened was I went to college in the city where I still live, which is Atlanta. And maybe, I guess 2011 would have been 5 years after I graduated, friends started coming to me and saying, I finished graduate school, or I've worked for a handful of years, or a lot of my friends have moved away. My life has changed. And when I poke my head up, I realize it's hard to make new friends and meet new people, because everywhere I go, I either feel like I'm getting hit on or sold to, or everyone's my parents' age. And having been out in the community, being really engaged and connecting with others through my merchant services company, I sort of realized that she was right when she brought this to my attention. I said, well, my favorite thing in the world is to connect people. So why don't I simply start an event where you can meet people on a peer-to-peer basis? You come, you just are authentically yourself. It feels more organic, and just the general vibe will be that you don't come here and shove business cards in each other's faces, and you don't come here to expect it to be a single scene or meat market. All that it is a place where we create an environment that's unique, whereby everyone's here to meet everybody, and it's just get to know them, lead with social interaction, let rapport build, and let those relationships evolve as they may. And it had so much traction that it accidentally became a business for me. And I feel very fortunate because most people toil to create something that the market wants, and I accidentally found something just by pursuing what I think is my highest gift, which is connecting people, and was able to make that into something more. So that's how that accidentally happened.
Well, it's a good accident. It's a good accident to have. I know that under 40 denotes the millennial generation. I'm curious. I know how I was taught to network, which is a little along the lines of what you said earlier, which is, hey, I should get every business card of every person in here, and it'll be a success if I do that. How has that changed for millennials? What does networking look like when you're actually in a venue where you're together?
Well, I've always said that networking is really just a fancy word for relationship building. So whereas what you're describing is maybe an old guard method, it's not aged. I'm not calling you old, but it's simply a former methodology around doing it. And now I think today, because we have so many tools to help us elaborate upon interactions that we have in person, like social media or different CRM systems or any number of other tools that exist to help us develop our relationship, there's a lot less fear and anxiety around showing up and feeling like this is my one chance to connect with everyone, so I've got to connect with everyone. And more so too, I think there's more research and evidence and anecdotal evidence that explains that it is more beneficial to connect with 1, 2, 3 people and go deep rather than surface level with 20, 30, 40 people or whatever that number looks like. That if you're just having these brief sort of gunshot interactions, you're not getting an opportunity to really find that connection point, and it's that connection point and that chemistry that's required to want to develop a relationship. So I would say you actually don't even give a business card until you've earned that right because someone's asked for it. And typically to get to that point in a conversation, there has to be enough of a vibe that's positive between you and your conversation partner that they're interested in continuing that dialogue. And when someone comes and instantly or quickly gives you a card when it's not been asked for, I tend to say that you've just created garbage, that you've just given me something that's immediately going to get thrown away, because I've often gotten a distasteful reaction to that because I didn't ask for it. It feels as though you're forcing something on me. And then third, you also don't have anything to leave me to remember you by because you've done it so quickly. And I already feel like, oh, well, why did you already go to that point, as opposed to just letting it more organically unfold. So bottom line, I just believe that today's version of networking, where you can spend more time with people no matter how big a crowd and really find a connection point and let that evolve as it may, is going to be light years more valuable than trying to run around a room and connect with as many people as you can, because it's not really connecting.
Oh, in the same terminology of a relationship, it's almost like asking for a kiss on the first date.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right, or asking for a kiss right when you show up, frankly. I mean, that's how it's like, hey, what do you want for dinner? Can I have a kiss? Like,
right.
It's just jumping the gun so tremendously that you use such a great analogy, because people understand that that's absurd, but they don't understand, based on other training or environments where it's more acceptable to go around and do what we've described, that that's also not acceptable.
So, and I see where this goes hand in hand with being a person who's a natural connector. I'm curious, because I love networking, but I've realized that just because you're there and I like you and we build a relationship in terms of, that initial bond, we have some similarities, some commonalities. It does not mean that you're right for my business, right? I mean, there has to be, I think the old guard was, you collected all of these and you made it fit. What do you say to those young newbies out there to keep them from having to think that just because I met you in this particular case and we hit it off, that I necessarily have to build a business relationship with you?
Yeah, there's so much wisdom to what you've just said, that when you meet someone, I think regardless of where the relationship will unfold to become, whether it's personal, professional, or both, we're living in a time now where those worlds aren't as separable as they once were, if separable at all, where your persona and your personality in your professional life ideally is the exact same one you have in your personal life. And we're seeing that so much through social media that, you know, your Facebook friends are very much also business professionals and other things of that nature, so that it actually builds and keeps you relevant and keeps people aware of what you're up to in a quite beautiful way. But it doesn't, I think it takes away a lot of the pressure and the stress around what's going to happen instantly and will I do business with this person, instead of, like, let me say it this way. People can smell desperation and they can sense when you're in something for your own benefit, either specifically or primarily. So I like to look at it from a mindset, and this has been studied and spoken about in Adam Grant's book, Give and Take. He's a professor at Wharton who did years-long studies on those who are givers, matchers, and takers in relationships. And while in the short term, those who are takers look like they're going to succeed the most, in the long term, givers are the ones who ultimately succeed. And I think for young people in particular who feel like A, I have nothing to offer, or B, I don't have time, I have goals that I have to hit and I have to get money so I'm not homeless, and these like real concerns that are legitimate.
Right.
Ultimately, I think when you look at things from a perspective of, even if my resource pool doesn't seem vast, it really is. I mean, no matter how old you are, you have a lifetime of connections and a Rolodex behind you, whether it's family or friends from school or places you've worked. And those are valuable to other people, even if to you they just seem so natural because they've been a part of your community and they're just friends. So when you go into an interaction and someone's saying, yeah, my husband and I are just trying to get out this weekend and we've had a hard time finding a babysitter, like that's a point at which you can say, oh, I've got 3 friends who would be happy to babysit. Let me put you in touch and see what their schedule looks like. And in that tiny way, you've added value to that relationship and you've not sought out for what your own gain is. And you've deepened that relationship so instantly in a way that was so simple for you, but not only benefits the recipient, but benefits the third party because they're potentially getting hired from that situation. And I think when you start to frame it in that way, just picking up on those cues and listening for opportunities to add value, you're going to see that while it's a long game, you're going to be more successful. So in the short term, not only is it fun to try and put those pieces together, but you end up seeing that that's really the best way to go about it. And you're going to turn a lot less people off.
You went exactly where I wanted you to go in asking about, I was going to ask it in a way that, what are your thoughts about sharing leads? You know, when I go to now, because I'm in media, I meet tons of people every day. What I've learned to enjoy is that I take the time out to figure out what you're great at and what you do and what you're passionate about. Even if I can't use it, I bump into so many people. And what's really cool is when someone needs somebody really specific and you can refer someone that's credible. I mean, I found, and I think that's exactly what you were saying, is that that's a way that you can build a relationship up that you can't mimic, right? Because you have yet to ask for anything. You're now looked at as someone with value, and people will want to do more business with somebody that they have a sense of value in.
Absolutely. And also, I think something people underestimate is that people aren't just how they represent. That obviously you are more than your job title and your career and your profession, but in addition to who you are holistically, you represent your entire Rolodex of people. So you are the gatekeeper to probably thousands and thousands of others. And that's something I think people often underestimate, that when you're having a conversation, do not discount someone because you don't see an instantaneous reason for you two to be connected. If you enjoy that connection, explore it. You have no idea who that person knows.
I'm curious about your methodology when you're at a networking event. And I know I read that you guys have, 500 plus at some of these events. How do you vet people? What's your vetting process specifically for you?
Mine is completely instinctual. If we're interacting and we just jive, then I'm interested in getting to know you. If for whatever reason my senses are telling me this isn't a fit for you, whether it's obvious, like you're being pushy or you're saying inappropriate things, like that's obvious. But in some cases, it's just a chemistry thing that while you may be an incredible person with great value to add to the world, if we're not clicking, you know, our time is limited. I'd rather not invest in relationships where I'm just not enjoying the company. And I think everyone should use that basis for how they decide this is my vetting parameters.
I think if everybody used that, we'd have a lot more success in business, because you're absolutely right. People will see, well, this guy is, you know, could possibly get me a loan. You can't stand them. You don't like them. Your spidey sense is going off that something's not right here, but you're like, I need that loan, or I need this service, and you go with it, and you wind up regretting it down the line. So thank you for saying that, because transparency is everything. So I noticed that you at some point created a 40 plus.
Yeah.
Well, let me guess. We Generation X people started crashing the party, and you're just like, okay, all right.
A little of that. It was also, frankly, hey, you keep getting on my case for saying I still want to connect. Where's my place? And I said, here it is. Show up. Because it was never so much about how old are you. It was simply about peers. And I'm under 40. And for me, I knew how to create environments that my peers could connect and would feel comfortable. So it was never saying, oh, people who are over 40 shouldn't connect, nor should people under 40 connect with people over 40, and vice versa. It's just that there's so many environments that exist where you can do that, and they're doing it well, that I wanted to create a place that wasn't represented for predominantly young professionals to get together and feel comfortable to grow together.
No, and I totally understand that. It could be very overwhelming to be at a place with a bunch of established 40, 50, 60-year-olds, and you're 28, 33, just starting in the business, and you've got to try to fit in. It could be game over before you start it. So absolutely, I see the need for that. So I'm interested now, are these two separate events, or do you ever join events? And the reason I ask this, because I'm interested in, do you know, have you seen, or do you advise a sort of process where under 40 budding entrepreneurs don't only work with, have relationships with, or do business with people their age?
Oh, I think you should do business with people and have relationships with people of all ages. When you're developing a network and cultivating a network, I always say you need to look up, down, sideways, diagonally, in every which direction, because you have value to add and they have value to offer to you. And there's experiences and things you can learn from one another. Critical. But I think that there's a lot of places that allow for people of all ages to come together and build and cultivate those relationships. So I think you should go as well to those communities, but when you're looking to make more peer-based relationships, that's what our community is for.
You know, I'm curious, and I don't know the answer to this, but do many young entrepreneurs even have business card? Is that the de facto way of life when communicating, you know, how to get in touch with me anymore? I honestly don't know the answer to that.
I mean, it depends. Like our events actually cover the industry gamut. It's industry agnostic, which is really fun because most people get really stuck in a silo of what their industry is. But there's plenty of people who show up and say, my job doesn't have business cards, and that's fine. So we use certain other technological ways to help people get each other's information, or you can just simply type it into someone's phone. But most do, I'd say majority, yes. So
I've seen lately that, and in some cases, this has happened to my latest, the last company I created, but specifically for a young person getting into the business or getting into business, period, technology has leveled in some part the playing field, where a young budding company can actually compete and take a slice of the market of some of the more established, even medium to larger companies. How have you seen that social media, no, I'm sorry, that technology has leveled the playing field?
I mean, I think you hit it on the head that, for example, when my payment company was new and we're competing against billion-dollar companies, it could seem completely daunting. But technology makes it such that it's not to say you should look something other than what you are, but you can certainly look like you're on the same playing field as some of these major players with having a beautiful website or having call center people to take calls or doing any number of things where you can outsource quite simply, effectively, and in many cases cost effectively to compete. You can get the graphic designers that people use for big bucks for cheaper. You can outsource a lot of things through platforms like Upwork, where you could get really high quality talent for a lower cost because you're outsourcing it somewhere else. And there's these like little tools and tricks I think that have really made that beneficial. Or there's ways that when you're small and you can leverage technology, whether it be social media or other tools, that you can actually be scrappy enough and nimble enough that you're moving more quickly than the speed of people who are much bigger and can really attack and get a huge piece or bite out of your market share.
So one of the things I see that bites people in the butt of all ages when they start a business is social media. And not the social media going forward, but the social media that they've already laid the tracks for. They don't realize that that they've already started their branding process, in a sense. What do you advise or talk about or encourage people to look like from a social media vantage point, where no matter what platform? And I only ask this because I know there are a lot of I see so many people who I actually would love to do business with, and I just happen upon their social media page, and it's a train wreck. It's scary, and you're like, wait a minute, you don't want to prejudge, but much of what social media is about prejudging. So, do you have any thoughts about that?
I think whether it's your business pages or your personal pages on social media, it has to be a clear and authentic extension of your brand and your values. So that comes down to the imagery, it comes down to the wording you're using, it comes down to the quantity of posting you're doing. They all need to blend and marry really naturally and organically. So I'm trying to think of an example of that. Like for my personal stuff, like everyone's personal pages are an extension of your personal brand. I'm not gonna go on there and post pictures of me passed out drunk somewhere because A, that's not who I am and I wouldn't do it. And if there was like that one time that ever happened, I would hope no one would go post that, because it's really a poor reflection of a part of me that would have in that case been a huge accident and not something that really is reflective. And I say that because, I mean, as absurd as it sounds, think about people who are in college and they're posting photos of themselves with drug paraphernalia or drinking, and that stays on the internet. It stays a part of their personal brand moving forward. And so from a business perspective, don't be aligning yourselves with other brands and retweeting them or sharing their content if they don't really align, or make sure that the voice that you have is really in alignment with what you believe in, because that's who you're going to attract as your customers, and that's who you're also going to push away based on whatever it is that you're saying. And not everyone is your customer, and you want to make sure you're talking to the right ones based on who you really are and what your brand voice should really say. And on the image portion, I think that's important too, that you don't want shoddy looking images that don't represent the high quality that hopefully your brand represents and is trying to promise of the value of your service or product. So make sure that you have professional photos and that you're not stealing them from people, or taking photography from somewhere online that's not really yours, that someone will see that and think like, oh, that's not even theirs. That doesn't speak very well of their values and their integrity.
And I guess one could make the argument of, you mentioned be yourself. I see so many people trying to be above who they are. I mean, it's one thing to look sharp, polished, and professional. It's another thing to kind of be disillusioned in who you are. And then when people finally meet you, whether it's your photos or whether it's just the way you run business, it's a total opposite of what they've already seen. And so I know people can sometimes shoot themselves in the foot by over exaggerating or,
Well, back to the dating and marriage analogy, it's the same thing. It's, if you're on a dating profile, don't put all of your photoshopped photos and best photos from 10 years ago. And then someone meets you and they're completely deflated thinking you don't look anything like that person. It's no different in this way either.
Sure. So could you give 2 nuggets, maybe like your 2 pet peeves or things that have benefited you for someone who's horrible at networking? Just 2 things that they can come into an event like yours and at least get to first base, using the analogy of a relationship.
It's so hard to narrow it down to just two, but
I know. Well, just give me whatever.
The first one that comes to mind that we touched on a little, which is someone who's so agenda pushing, where they come in and it's like they have no social prowess to understand how to elegantly enter a conversation, especially when other people are already connecting, or how to engage someone in such a way that they're going to want to naturally open up in a conversation and evolve into a dialogue, as opposed to coming in and just saying, hey, I'm Darrah, I'm founder of Network Under 40. Have you ever checked out our events? And just like, bam, 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 like let me push my agenda on you. And I've also probably interrupted your conversation to do that. And then here's my business card, see you later. Like to me, that's like you just came and had a random assault and they left and your head is spinning and you're thinking, who was that? And I feel so taken advantage of, like what just happened. That to me is a huge pet peeve when you're just so self-focused. Additionally to that, I just think it comes down to that basic curiosity thing, that if you come into a situation to meet someone and you're not adding anything to the dialogue, and especially if you're not adding based on a premise of, I genuinely want to get to know more about you and I'm going to ask thoughtful questions to which I really want to know the answer, and then we're going to build off of that, rather than, okay, here's my script. I'm going to ask you, how's your day? And then why are you here? And then, hey, let me tell you about my business and give you my pitch. What's your pitch? And it's very rote, and you can tell that there's no personalization to it. To me, that's so robotic, and it's such the antithesis of what it takes to really connect and engage.
I think the word pitch should be taken out of our lexicon when it comes to networking, because you're right. I remember mine, it was like, I couldn't wait to go. I didn't even hear what you said. I just was like practicing mine in my head.
Right, and that's exactly it. If you're not listening, that's so obvious. It's like I might say something and then it falls flat because you're in your own mind thinking, when's my turn? And that's a sin. Like, don't do that.
There we go. All right. So I've only got a couple more questions to ask. I'd be a horrible interviewer if I didn't talk a little bit about the fact that you wrote some literary books on finances with kids, finance with kids. Tell me a little bit about what could we or should we be talking to our kids about, or empowering them and at what age can we start doing this?
So interestingly, studies show that kids start learning about money as early as age 3. And I think what's unfortunate about that is most parents and adults in children's lives are modeling really negative behavior, and they don't realize how much it's influencing their child's forever perceptions of money and the value about that and all of the stress or otherwise that they're going to perceive around it. So for me, I feel like one of the first things to talk to kids about with money is responsibility is attached to it. That money isn't this thing that just pops out of a machine on a wall, or that you get this magical plastic card and swipe it and you get what you want and that's it. That there's real teachings around that. I mean, there's a father that told me a really interesting story one time where he said, every time I go to a restaurant with my kids and I leave, there's sun all over my face, so sorry. Every time I go to a restaurant with my kids, I leave tip on the table, and I would leave and my youngest son would always be sitting there and dawdling. And I would say, like, whatever his name was, Henry, why were you always waiting behind? And he said, Dad, you were just wasting money. You were just leaving it on the table. I was collecting it.
Oh, wow.
The dad obviously was a little bit mortified because it looked like he'd never been leaving a tip, but more so he realized, as adults, these practices around money that we have that seem so basic, like swiping your credit card or typing into an ATM and cash popping out, or, writing a check or leaving tip, seems so basic, but to a child, there's so much that they're just seeing on the surface, and they're not understanding the correlation that there's a bank account attached and you had to earn that money and what you had to do for that, and that there's taxes, and that if you're out of money, that there's debt and there's responsibility to all of these things, and there's consequence with money when not treated a certain way. And it made this light bulb go off, this gentleman, to say, I really had to start being more proactive to explain these basic transactions to my children. So I feel like it's as simple as that when we're going through our daily routines, we say, when you ask me for that $20 to get whatever you're asking for, that actually took these hours of work and these tax payments, and that's a lot. And what do we think the value is? And so I'm a big proponent of having allowance systems for kids and having them work towards it and having them be deducted for when they're not doing certain chores that are allocated and associated with their age and their tasks. And I think there's a lot of personal values around this, and each family should structure it for themselves in a way that feels comfortable to them. However, I think it's a conversation that we need to be having with our children as early as age 3, to let them understand that when they want things, that they can make some decisions because they have some money to spend and some money to save, and they've worked for it and earned it. And it's not this mystery thing that at age 18 you go off and you say, well, now I need to apply for a credit card and pay for my phone bill or college or whatever these things are, and everyone's been taking care of it for you and you have no clue.
I just thought of a last question. I know that was the last question, but one just came up. I want to make sure we get this in because you would be a great person to ask this. So you all have a brokerage service. We talked about that earlier. What is the advantages of using a service like that if I'm a business and I'm taking in credit card receipts versus what I think people get in the norm of using is something like a PayPal, which has this, gets its easier in a sense, but not necessarily more valuable?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, something like a PayPal, I always tell people like PayPal, Square, Stripe, that are super simple out of the box. You can just sign up online and their pricing is super straightforward, are great for businesses that are what are called micro businesses. When you're doing about $2,500 or less total in monthly transaction volume, that's about where the ROI is going to flip for a business to using a traditional merchant account provider like ourselves, where you're going to have to put a little bit more energy into the front end of setting it up, and you're going to have a little bit of carrying costs like a small monthly service fee, but your per transaction fees are significantly less, usually to the tune of 20 to 30% less. That the value is that when you break over that $2,500 a month or so mark, that you're going to see the savings pretty quickly. There's a number of other benefits on both sides, depending on certain technology needs or otherwise, but that's about where that is. And then from the brokerage standpoint versus any other way you could set up a credit card processing account, it's just like if you were to go to an insurance provider who brokers and say, here's my specific needs, which one is best for me? Businesses are no different with credit card payments. They have underwriting principles. Certain ones only have certain appetites for certain businesses, have certain proclivities towards rates and terms, contracts, no contracts, softwares and hardwares that they offer. So whereas maybe your business, Clark, would be great with provider X, mine might be Y and someone else's might be Z. And to go to someone who's an expert and knows where to put you and can leverage certain things to get you no contracts and lower rates and all of these other things, saves you time from having to figure it out for yourself, and you're not paying them. So you have no downside.
Have you seen that it's one way or the other when we're talking about a brick and mortar versus a .com business?
No. Again, that breaking point of volume really plays into it.
Still plays it. Okay.
Yeah, it really comes down to that because we work with businesses of all varieties, meaning however they choose to take credit card payments in person, by phone, online, etc. And there are certain cases where we'll say Square or Stripe or PayPal is better for you, and here's why, but it's generally volume reasons or amount of risk that their business has given what underwriting would perceive.
Excellent. Well, this has been very enjoyable and informative. Thank you so much for taking time. Do you have any upcoming events that you can let our listeners know about?
Yeah, I mean, your listeners are all over the country, and currently we're in 6 cities. We're in Baltimore, DC, Atlanta, Nashville, Charlotte, and Birmingham. So my recommendation would simply be to check out our website, which is networkunder40.com. And there is an event listing. We have one per month in each city and some lunches even in a couple of them. So check them out. Would love to meet you or have you meet some of the folks who run our events and help you get plugged in even more deeply in your city.
There it is. Dara, thank you so very much for hanging out with us. Guys, that concludes our Taking Back Your Life series for today. If you want to see any of the previous ones, go to my website at clarkgarrison.com, spelled a little different, K-L-A-R-Q-U-E, Garrison with a G.com. You'll be able to see who's coming up next and some of the ones that you may have missed. Thank you so very much for hanging out with us. We'll see you next time.